Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be joining us from, and welcome to Wise at Work virtual communities. My name is Parneet Pal. I am the Chief Science Officer at Wisdom Labs, and I'm absolutely delighted that you're joining us for this session on the unshakable core of resilient well-being with our special guest today, Dr. Rick Hanson. Now, for those of you who've been joining us at these weekly sessions every week, we're really happy that you're back here again as part of this community. But if it's your first time with Wisdom Labs, we are a San Francisco-based company solving for stress, burnout, and loneliness in the workplace using the science of mindfulness, resilience, and compassion. And in our work, we build communities of practice just like this in organizations globally to help employees build their mental, emotional, and social well-being. And as our response to COVID, we've been really happy to be hosting these Wednesday 30-minute online gatherings as part of the virtual communities, where we learn and practice with some of the world's greatest experts in these areas who are generously donating their time and helping us as a community build our resilience in this time of crisis. Now, for our session today, I will recommend that we use the chat room to post questions throughout. So as Rick takes us through the learn and practice, he has been very generous and is open to answering questions at the end. So please make sure you type in your questions throughout, and then I'll pick some of them at the end that he can address. So it's now my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Rick Hanson. His accomplishments are too long to list here, but what I would say is that he is a renowned psychologist with an expertise in positive neuroplasticity. He's a senior fellow at the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. And he's also a New York Times bestselling author, a much sought after international speaker. And if you haven't already subscribed to his newsletter, Just One Thing, I highly recommend it. What I found is that often when I open that newsletter, I find the one idea or one tip or one tool that I just needed to hear that day to overcome whatever I was facing that day. Most importantly, for those of us who know Rick, we know that he is an extraordinary teacher and he embodies the kindness and the wisdom that he speaks about. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you, Rick. Good morning.
Oh, Parneet, thank you. That was an extremely gracious introduction. And I want to also express my gratitude to Wisdom Labs, which is a fountain of wisdom, and to the people who are participating on this call. So I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Rick. Please take it away.
Okay, great. So I'd like to talk about the roots of resilience. In other words, how do we actually become resilient so that we can recover from and live through the worst day of our lives, as well as thrive and function and succeed while retaining well-being every day of our life as we manage challenges with others, keep on going when it's tiring or frustrating, work through conflicts, deal with the internal reactions coming up inside our own minds. And these days, late April 2020, deal with a pandemic. I think of it as a kind of storm that's falling on all of us, some, unfortunately, much more intensively than others. You know, how to deal with the current situation, which is understandably disruptive and often alarming, worrisome, stressful, and challenging. Well, resilience is what we draw upon to be able to deal with all that. So the question then becomes, what is the basis of resilience? What causes resilience? Resilience at the individual level is the result of a number of internal psychological factors, psychological resources, inner strengths, such as mindfulness, grit. Happiness is a major resource for resilience, compassion, self-awareness, gratitude, a sense of personal worth, secure attachments and connections with others, and so forth. So these are inner strengths that produce resilience. Then the natural question becomes, how do we get these inner strengths? Where do they come from? And research generally on the classic nature-nurture balance indicates that roughly a third of the variation in adult development, who we become, including these factors of resilience, is based on heritable factors baked into our genetic material. All right, that's the third we can't change itself. The other 2/3, though, of the variation in adult characteristics, including whether or not a person is resilient, is not heritable. It's based on things that come at us from the environment, and in particular, how we respond to them and how we work with our own minds along the way. In other words, in principle, that other 2/3 of who we are becoming is influenceable. So how do we influence these factors of resilience, such as grit or gratitude or compassion? Well, we learn them, we develop them, which then takes us into the natural question of how do you change the brain for the better? How do you actually foster the lasting changes in neural structure and function that are the necessary underlying basis of any personal development or healing? In other words, if we think of the acquisition of skillfulness in managing others, or the acquisition of greater confidence in public speaking, or the acquisition of patience dealing with the people that you're living in close quarters with, let's suppose, as I am myself these days. The process of that acquisition is neurological, and it involves 2 steps. Both are really important, and the second one is routinely forgotten. So the first step, we must experience what we want to grow. If we want to become more compassionate, we begin by having experiences of compassion. If we want to develop a disengagement from the pounding self-criticism we acquired back in junior high school, or in our last job, we must experience that disengagement. Whatever we want to develop, we must experience it first. And then in the necessary step, the second step, we must turn that experience into a lasting change in the brain. Critically important point here. Experiencing does not equal learning. This is the dirty little secret in psychotherapy, counseling, coaching, mindfulness training, self-compassion training, human resources training, raising kids, training employees. Experiencing does not equal learning. And we've all had a sense of this, right? There you are interacting with your partner, and you think to yourself, next time I need to act differently or do something different. You do the same thing. Or you have a moment of, you feel calmer after meditating, or at the end of the day, you look around, you go, oh, there are things I'm grateful for. But there's no greater trait gratitude or trait calm, because there's not a conversion from state to trait. So I'm going to introduce some factors that we can engage internally through mental activity alone that mobilize neural factors of learning in the broadest sense. Emotional learning, somatic learning, motivational learning, social learning, even spiritual learning. How do we help the beneficial experiences that we're having actually sink in and stick with us and leave lasting residues behind? In other words, how do we increase the conversion from state to trait? Or to say the same thing a little differently, how do we steepen a person's growth curve, their healing curve, their development curve over the course of a single meeting or meditation session or day or week or life? How do we actually do that? So I want to mention a number of evidence-based factors that we can engage ourselves, and then I'll take you through an experiential practice that focuses on them. So if we want to increase the conversion from state to trait, right? There's the famous saying, neurons that fire together can wire together. So how can we heighten that wiring so that as we move through the day, we actually become more resilient, wiser, happier, more loving, and stronger every day? How do we actually do that? Well, I want to highlight 3 factors we can all engage. Any one is good, the more the better, and the more often we do it, the steeper our growth curve will be. So the first factor is to stay with the experience. There's no magic amount of time. There's probably a threshold, unless it's $1 million moment, of at least a few seconds. So stay with the experience for a breath or longer. When you have a sense of your own worth, don't just change the channel. Stay with that experience for a breath or 2 or more. If you have a feeling of closeness, that you're actually included or cared about or okay, stay with that experience for a breath or longer. Second, feel it in the body. The more that we have a sensate anchor for the experiences we're having, the greater the conversion to lasting changes in the brain. Feel it in the body. And a third wonderful thing we can do to highlight our learning is to focus on what's rewarding about the experience, what's enjoyable about it or meaningful about it. Technically, that will increase dopamine and norepinephrine activity in the brain. And as dopamine and norepinephrine activity in the brain increases based on the sense of greater reward, basically what happens in the brain is that the experience at the time with higher dopamine and norepinephrine levels is flagged for protection and prioritization as it becomes consolidated into long-term storage. Any one of these methods is good. All three are even better. They're easy to do. The key, of course, like with so many things, is to actually do them repeatedly. So I'm going to do a little practice with you now, and then we can open it up for some questions and discussion. You want to try it? All right. So begin by noticing that as you exhale, you're actually relaxing a little naturally. That engages the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system when we exhale, which slows the heart rate. So I'll do this practice with you. So we start by having a beneficial experience of calming as we exhale, and then we internalize it, we install it into ourselves to grow trait calm, trait ease, and relaxation over time. So see if you can get a sense of letting go and relaxing as you exhale. And then foregrounding what you're noticing already of calming as you exhale and focusing on the experience of calming. Perhaps with long exhalations. Feel the calming in your body. And notice how calming feels good. It's enjoyable. Okay. That was that little experiment in the laboratory of your own brain. And a key point I'd like to make here, and then I'll continue with the practice, is that brief episodes, 10 seconds long, even just 5 seconds long, when they're repeated, can make an enormous difference, which is extremely wonderful and hopeful. It means that we can actually influence the brain change process from the inside out in lots of little authentic ways every day, in the middle of everything else that's happening. The second way to have a beneficial experience, besides simply noticing one you're already having, is to create it. So then we get those neurons firing together because we've created a beneficial experience. And then we can, in the second step, help them to wire together inside our brain. So here, I suggest you bring to mind something you feel grateful for. Create an experience of thankfulness or gladness. Perhaps thinking of people that you're grateful for or situations in your life. You might softly say in your mind, thank you. And help the idea of what you're grateful for become a feeling of gratitude. And then once you start to have that experience of gratitude, help it get installed into your brain. Stay with it. If your mind wanders, it's okay. Just come back. Taking gratitude, in effect, as an object of meditation. Noticing how your body sort of softens and opens when you're grateful. It feels good to be grateful. Wow. Just appreciating so many of the gifts in this life amidst what's a problem. Okay. So come on back. I'll finish up here. The last kind of point I'll make about all this is that many of the things we grow inside ourselves are not like smelling the flowers. Nothing wrong with smelling the flowers. But much of what we grow are things like grit or understanding or skillfulness or muscular commitment to something. So these methods are the ways that we can develop anything important we want to grow in ourselves. It's not just about, noticing the beautiful sunset. Second, last, we can use this general process of positive neuroplasticity, self-directed neuroplasticity from the inside out. We can apply it to growing particular inner strengths that would be especially useful for certain challenges. These days, for example, a lot of people are dealing with understandable anxiety. Inner resources that help with anxiety include things like a sense of calm strength or determination or the recognition that you're actually all right, basically, in the present at least. These are inner strengths that are applied to challenges to safety and that are marked by experiences of anxiety, for example. So that's an illustration of a broad point. Okay, I'd like to turn it over to Parneet and see if there are any questions or comments here. So I'm in your hands, Parneet, virtually at this point.
Thank you, Rick. That was wonderful. And what I especially appreciated about that practice was you breaking it down into these very understandable chunks. Yeah. And I think one of the takeaways, at least for me, is that it doesn't take that much time for us to start building these skills, especially when we feel like there's so much chaos around us. And now, oh God, mindfulness is like, I have to separate, so many minutes of my precious time to do this. And what you so wonderfully showed is that, we can start to take even just a few seconds in that direction of cultivation.
Yeah. And if I could, I'd really like to underline that if we don't do this, if we don't help the experiences we're having to leave traces behind, we've left all that money on the table.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So we're getting a few questions, and one of the questions was, Rick, could you please help us understand what exactly you mean by grit, and what's the difference between grit and resilience, or is there a difference?
Oh, okay. Grit, Angela Duckworth, for example, a scholar, UPenn, has done a lot of research on grit. It's sort of the sense of fundamental undefeatability in the core of your being, that there's a kind of core of determination or resolve or tenacity. These are different words for grit. Grit is certainly an aspect of resilience. Other aspects of resilience are, we could say, tender. Grit is like the tough part of resilience. Like, it's what remains even after a lot of grinding has happened. For me, I think of it as scruffy resolve. I think of my wife as like a butterfly. I'm like a cockroach. You're going to whack me 100 times. I'm like, there's a place for that, right? But there's also tender, sweet aspects of resilience, like self-compassion is a really important factor of resilience, as a lot of research shows.
Thank you. And one of the other questions we had was if you could share some examples of using this practice in the workplace, and especially as we're working from home, are there some specific times during the day in some activities that we can start to engage these practices with?
Oh, yeah. The key question, and this goes also to Carol Dweck's work, growth mindset. In other words, do you see yourself as a learner? How are you helping yourself learn today?
Mhm.
How are you helping yourself grow today? A little bit at least. So you go to bed a little wiser, a little stronger, a little happier, a little more loving than when you woke up in the morning. That's a fundamental question. What are you trying to help yourself learn, especially in the social, emotional, somatic, aspects of life that really matter most? So that's the key point. What are you trying to grow today? And so there are many opportunities when we're working at home to help ourselves learn or develop, to help learning land, right? So that the next time something happens, we've acquired a little better habit. That's another way of talking about this, the next time. And if we supervise people or work with people, it can be appropriate without trying to play therapist with them. I think it's important to sort out these roles, but to ask a person, what's your takeaway from this? What do you want to help yourself remember the next time around? How do you want to help yourself be different the next time you're interacting with that difficult customer, or the next time you're just over criticizing yourself and kind of collapsing in frustration here? How do you want to help yourself develop? This doesn't have to, it's not fancy, and it doesn't have to sound fancy. It's the essence of self-reliance. How are you helping yourself change for the better? It's not that there's anything wrong with you. On the other hand, we have, life is full of opportunities to grow and develop. And, what team do you want to be on? The team that basically has an absolutely flat learning curve, or do you want to be on the team, the individual, or the organization that's a learning organization that actually has some delta there, some growth over time?
Wonderful. And I think you perfectly addressed one of the other questions that was coming up around the workplace was, as a leader, how can I engage with these ideas with my team? And I think you highlighted that beautifully.
Yeah. If I could just say, also as a leader, teacher, and given, I have a business background before I became a soft-headed therapist. And, I think that one of the keys, honestly, is just giving it an extra beat to let the learning land, taking that extra half a breath, so that it sinks in. We're so addicted to the next shiny object, to chasing the next thing, rather than, you can just feel it in a person or in a group. Oh, take that extra moment to let it land. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The brain is so fast. Neurons are firing 5 to 50 times a second routinely. I mean, it's very quick, but we have to give it that beat, especially conceptual learning, information learning. We can acquire that extremely quickly. But motivational learning, social learning, somatic learning, emotional learning, attitudinal learning, and attitude, the attitude of a winner, as it were, that takes an extra few beats, because that involves more ancient systems in the brain that are involved with social emotional learning.
So one of the other themes that's coming up in the questions is they loved your technique in the meditation, Rick, and they're wondering if there's a mnemonic that you could use for the 3 steps to help them remember it better.
Oh, that's interesting. So those 3 methods of, stay with it for a breath or longer, feel it in your body, notice what's rewarding about it. I just pulled them out of a larger mnemonic that I use. I'll summarize it very briefly. That's the fundamental structure. If you want to know the fundamental, how we can take charge of the brain change process from the inside out in a positive, useful, good way, I use the acronym HEAL. HEAL stands for have a beneficial experience, usually because you just notice it. There's no fake it till you make it. You notice what you're already feeling, or sometimes create it, like we created an experience of gratitude. And then once that pattern of activation is occurring, now we move into installation, the second necessary step of any learning, where we convert that experience to a lasting change. E in the acronym stands for enrich, like feel it in your body or take some time with it. A stands for absorb. It's the sense of receiving it into yourself, and objectively, neurologically, it means sensitizing the memory, emotional memory, making apparatus of the brain. And a key way to do that is to highlight what's rewarding, because when we're attentive to what's rewarding, when we feel rewarded, that sensitizes our brains to the experiences we're having at the time, right? It's a little bit like a fire. Have fire, right? Enrich the fire by protecting it and adding logs to it, and then absorb the warmth of the fire into yourself. And then the optional last step, L, stands for link. To link, if we want, positive and negative material together so that the positive soothes the negative. For example, we could have a prominent sense of gratitude while off to the side, is a sense of frustration or loss, inconvenienced or losses. And yet alongside it is so much else in terms of gratitude. So the positive can heal the negative. That's the fundamental process. And people at my website can see lots and lots of freely offered resources that go into this in detail and substantiated in the research literature.
Wonderful. And so heal, that's really easy to remember. Yeah. And Rick, when we focus on these positive experiences, and I know our brain has a negativity bias, but is there ever any danger of sort of going to the other extreme and wanting to crave a lot of positive experiences all the time?
That's a very interesting question. I think we crave because we feel empty. Craving broadly, including its subtle forms, is a drive state based on a sense of something missing, something wrong, right? On the other hand, as we gradually fill ourselves up, drop by drop, synapse by synapse, from the inside out, we feel fuller inside. We feel already contented, already strong, already loved, already worthy. So then we become less driven in a neurotic sense, my precious, to search for that outside ourselves, to take it in, because we feel already full. And then on the basis of that, we still are ambitious. We still aspire. We want our business to be successful. We want to adapt to the changing world. We want to help the world become a better place, right? We're active, but we don't do it. We're ambitious, we're aspirational on the basis of feeling full already, contented already, worthy already, enough already, rather than something's missing, something's wrong, I need to get more. And that changes everything.
It absolutely does. Even as you were speaking, I found myself sitting up straighter because I was feeling that sensation of, as you alluded to, that sense of good and purpose and fullness that we all have access to.
Most pain has no gain. There's this ridiculous idea that we only grow through pain. And also, if you're not miserable, you're not really paying attention. I mean, both are true. Actually, as we develop these resources inside and we actually become and develop resilient well-being, most people become nicer. Most people become more patient, forgiving. They're not so cranky and prickly and desperate. And they become more pro-social. A lot of research indicates this as well. So we do it for the sake of others as well as ourselves, to grow the good inside ourselves.
Beautiful. I wish we could keep talking to you, Rick, but I see that we are running out of time. So first, I want to say thank you again so much. We're so grateful for your time and your wisdom. How can folks get in touch with you, Rick?
I'll briefly go to my website, rickhanson.net. Tons of freely offered resources, including some that are specific to this coronavirus time. Also, they can find short little snippets, talks, videos, articles. Also, I have some great online programs. They're very inexpensive. We also have scholarships for people in financial need, which is a very important purpose for us. So I would say just go to my website, rickhanson.net.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rick. And for all of you who've joined us, thank you so much. It means so much for us that you come back week after week to build this community. And please be sure to continue your practice using the Wise at Work app that all of you, when you register for any of these sessions, have access to for free, no strings attached, for 90 days to help you build that practice and that neuroplasticity that Rick was alluding to. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always reach us at info@wisdomlabs.com. So again, thank you, Rick. I'm seeing an outpouring of love and
thank you, everyone.
In the chat room for you. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take good care. And to everyone, we'll see you next week.